I am going to talk about data-based ESG reporting, focusing on the E, of course. The E is for environment, and we're talking about sustainability today, so that's why I focus on the E. This is a bit about me. My name is Frolich. My background is in applied mathematics from the Technical University of Denmark. I have all my 3 degrees from there. Sounds a bit boring if you've been to DTU. There are a lot of yellow bricks, red doors. I have had a few external stays, which has been great, living in Berlin, San Diego, Spain as well. So I've been able to see other things than yellow bricks and red doors. Since then, I've held various positions in research and consultancy, and now I'm very happy to be here together with Emilia and Michael in Amesto Next Bridge in Denmark. So the agenda for today, it's about ESG reporting first, so what and why is that? And then how have we analyzed that quantitatively, and what are the results, and then conclusions in the end. So first of all, the what and the why of ESG reporting. Now, I said ESG a few times. You might not all know what E, S, and G stand for. It stands for environment, social, and governance. And these are topics that are going to become more and more important with the European CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which more and more companies are going to have to be regulated by starting from 2023. And have to report on these topics. And specifically in this document, these specific things I mentioned. So for environment, it's these 6 bullet points. I don't know why the other ones are so much more wordy. Is environment so much more easy, so much easier to handle? I don't know. That's just copy-pasted from there. So that's how that is. Then why do companies do ESG reporting? Well, as I mentioned, there's of course the regulations, laws are actually required to do so. So of course that's a very important answer to why do we do it. Then also ethically and expectations in society, it's like the right thing to do, right? We want to know as a company that we are working in a sustainable fashion. And there are actually also financial incentives, like Emilia also mentioned. There are different articles. I just found a few ones here, one from Harvard and another one that you can't really see here, which both look into how the focus on ESG actually impacts the financial bottom line and how those are correlated. This goes in line with if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? So we need to measure it in order to start controlling it and minimizing energy consumption, pollution, and so on. And that's also part of the Amesto footprint, which is a solution that I am not directly involved with. So that's part of the benefit of being part of a larger group. So we have colleagues in Norway working on this, and they're looking at the bigger picture. In just a minute, I'm going to get into the more specialized part that I'm actually going to talk about. But in the bigger picture, we do have all of these aspects. We have the data collection on various things, so that's of course going towards the E. Then we have the social parts on how are the people in the company doing and people affected by company and so on. And this Amesto footprint solution actually looks into quantifying these different aspects and creating a report to show how is this going for a specific company. A bit along this as well, it's part of this bigger picture where we have a bunch of data, and then as usual, you might know if you've worked with data that it does need to be engineered a bit. We are very happy to be able to work with data engineers. Like you mentioned, we have other parts that can help us really get the data in good order, and then we can start to analyze it and put it into operation, of course, so that we in the end get a data-driven approach to ESG. We can have live data coming in, updated transactional data feeding into reports on CO2 emission on scope 2 or 3 goals. So this is sort of the bigger picture, but what I'm going to talk about is this part down here, which is data innovation and specifically web scraping and NLP. So you might ask who's interested in this, and as I tried to mention, a lot of people at least should be interested in this, I would say. So there are CEOs that probably want to keep an eye on tracking how they're doing so that the board is kept happy and investors are kept happy. Supply chain managers want to keep a track of how their supply chain is in terms of sustainability. Can they count on this to continue to work and be sustainable, so they can report their sustainability goals appropriately and so on. So this quantitative analysis, and this is using NLP. So the focus of the case study is on publicly traded companies, because they have been subject to these sort of directives for a while. So these have already created the reports that we're interested in looking into, and that a lot more companies will have to create starting from 2023. Then publicly available ESG reports, again, that if we don't have the data, then we can't analyze it. So we've chosen companies that have publicly available ESG reports, and that's the case for large companies, because they are subject to these directives. So this is the focus of the case study. And that turns into 36 reports. A lot of these are, well, they happen to be from the financial sector. I have listed some of the rows here. So this is just a screenshot of a data frame from Python, how my data looked in my notebook when I was running my analysis. And as you can see, I'm only showing the first 15 rows, but there are some more rows. And then what do we do to build an NLP model? Well, these are the typical steps you would go through in building an NLP model. You have to do some pre-processing. You want to remove punctuation, like question marks, periods, and so on, because it's not really relevant to the semantic meaning of the text. Similarly for stop words, like small words that just appear all over the place, and, or, so forth. And then reducing complexity. So if you have words like I was playing, and then we played, and so on, then you want all of those to just be shortened to the stem of the root, which is play, so that you don't analyze them as being different concepts. So that's also part of this. That's the lemmatization and stemming tokenization that all go toward this goal. Then there's some feature extraction that happens, and then finally we can actually do our applications from NLP, which can be different types. I've just listed a few here. Sentiment analysis, what sort of sentiment is the text expressing? Is it positive, negative, some other thing? What sort of entities might be mentioned, like company names, persons, places, things we can recognize from the real world. And topic modeling, trying to extract topics from a text without having any labels. So it's an unsupervised type of learning, and that's what we use here. So in the work that I've done, these analyses, I've done the pre-processing steps. I've done some of the options that were listed here. I haven't done the embedding part. And then I've used what's called a latent theoretically allocation model for the topic modeling. It's quite a simple model, but I didn't want to dig too deep into really optimizing the model, because I just wanted to show the sort of concept. And so going back a bit, so what did we want to do? Well, we wanted to look into these ESG topics. There are 6 ESG topics that are related to environment, and those are the ones that I wanted to try to analyze in these text documents. So since there are 6, I started to run my LDA model with 6 components, meaning that I wanted to find 6 different topics in these texts. And when you plot these topics, so each of these circles correspond to a topic, and the size indicates how often it appears in these documents. In this case, we see that we have 2 of the topics here, topics 1 and 2 overlapping quite a bit, and topics 3 and 5 as well. So that's not too optimal. When we want to derive topics, we want to have them as distinct as possible, so they actually represent different concepts. So I decreased to 5 topics instead of 6. And then it looks like this, and that made me happy. So I continued. And then I used a word cloud to visualize these topics to try to get an understanding of what does topic 1 actually represent, what does topic 2 represent, and so on. And this is of course up for discussion, and different people might read different things out of this. This is what I thought made sense, and I've tried to highlight the words in each of the topics that sort of made me make that decision. So in topic 0, I noticed that it had really high emphasis on human and probably from emissions, and rights could be human rights maybe. So how do we adapt to climate change was sort of what I got from this, because I wanted to put it into the context of the ESG topics that were already defined. And to me, this was the sort of the best connection for the first topic. And then the second one seemed to focus on investing. I couldn't really see how that would fit with any of the 6 defined topics, so I just put it as investing. It's about finance, market. Of course, there's some green and sustainability in there as well. I thought investing covered it pretty well. And so on. For legislation, I thought that fitted pretty well with topic 2. Topic 3 seemed to indicate resource use, circular economy. There's some sustainability, investing, managing business. And the last topic I thought was about climate change mitigation. If we can see climate risk and analysis. So how do we, what do we do to decrease our emissions? How do we avoid too much climate change? And then you might notice over here that there are 2 of these topics. Actually, this one as well, I call it that wrongly. So some of these are not mentioned at all in these ESG reports from the finance sector. So that's the first finding. The first thing I sort of noticed, that the finance sector does seem to focus on some of parts of the E topics, but not all of them. And then I looked into, well, how much focus does each company put on these topics, and I visualized that in this way. And what we can see from here is that there are some companies that have quite high focus of all of the topics, and this is a bit maybe a bit misleading because I haven't normalized it by length of document. So if you have a really long document, you're bound to mention words more often. So that's an improvement that I would make going further with this analysis. So that's a thing to keep in mind. But other than that, you can also sort of see that there are some of the topics that seem to be a bit more broadly focused on than others. So actually investing is not really high for a lot of companies. That was actually about what I wanted to say, because I also have a feeling that time is running. So I just want to conclude. As I mentioned, the main findings that I thought were really interesting was that some of the E-related topics in those ESG reports are actually described and focused on, whereas others are not really mentioned at all. So of course, if you're a CEO, you might want to think, well, is there any sort of learning from this? Should we maybe focus a bit more on these areas, or at least upfront make a decision whether we want to do that or put all of our emphasis on other areas? And then I also found it a bit interesting that these 2 were the topics that they focused mostly on. So there was climate change adaptation, so more like what do we do to change our behavior to deal with climate change rather than more mitigate it. And then finally, there's quite a large difference when we were looking at that heat map before between the rows. So it's not like all of the financial companies find the same things most important. There's actually quite a difference between them. Next steps. So this was just using the company's own ESG reports. So what do they say they're doing? That's one thing, right? What do I say I'll do? But another thing is, what do I actually do? And that is something that could be reported by the media, the press, social media. So it would be really interesting to compare the findings from the company's own ESG reports to what the rest of the world is saying about them, right? And then sort of maybe also track that. So that's another analysis that would be interesting to do. And then also look at older reports. So we could find the ESG report from 2018, 2019, 2020, so on, and then see, well, how are their focus areas changing across time? And can we also find a correlation between that and their stock value even, maybe, right? That would be really interesting. And then finally, when we have all of these ESG reports starting to come out in a few years, we'll have a lot more data, so we can actually create an industry baseline. So if you're in some industry and you want to see how am I doing compared to the rest of the industry, you can actually do that. And that was it. Are there questions, comments? would love ideas also, improvements. Yeah.
Actually, I have three things. One would be like two more technical, one something else. The technical part is like, how do you, first, how do you standardize in terms of the length of the reports? Because, I mean, I would assume that there is no like fixed way how they write them. So this is something like that you do it on paragraph level and then aggregate somehow, because you know every report can mention everything. It can also mention view. So that's like one. Do you consider adding maybe to the topic some sort of sentiment analysis or something like to see what is actually, you know, the sentiment towards a certain
That's
topic.
a really good idea.
And the third one, are you open for student project collaboration? Because we have a couple of students I think that could be actually very interested in these kind of projects.
Yeah, let's definitely discuss. Let's definitely discuss. Yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah.
I think the sentiment is actually in there. You just didn't show it, but we actually do that. If you see when we did it also in the webinar, we actually do it.
Yeah, and as I said, I haven't actually looked into normalization of this, which is definitely something that could be improved, because definitely if the report is really long, you can just, you know, say we mitigate climate change by reducing emissions. We mitigate climate change by reducing emissions.
It's like, you know, I mean, the Barclays up top,
yeah.
it's all kind of like, oh, they're doing everything.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a bit weird. Like, why are they doing everything in the others?
Exactly, and I think that's actually due to the length of the report. So it's definitely something that should be taken into account in the analysis. But I just didn't think about it beforehand, only when seeing that. So, yeah, a lot of hands. Maybe starting from the back.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's you. Yeah.
So you said that for the future, maybe you use this as kind of like a baselining method.
Yeah.
Right now, it seems that you're introducing a bit of bias because you're basing it on these like word clouds and you're labeling it yourself.
Yeah.
If you ask to use it as a baseline, potentially you could explore some options that do not introduce this bias, so that it's a bit more unbiased if you have to use it as a baseline.
Yeah. That's
it's just a suggestion on like.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe like using a pre-trained classifier to try to find topics or something like that. Yes.
It could be a bit like how dangerous that you label yourself and then there's a human introducing this, and then you go and use it as a baseline.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so with the baseline, I don't mean like as an, you know, an industry standard, more like an for your own understanding of how you are on these topics defined in this way. Because of course, it's not up to me to define a global standard. So it's more to get the sense of how you are compared to your competitors. But of course, that would
I think that the end-to-end idea is super cool actually, how you're doing it stepwise. So it's just this one step where you could keep it a bit more objective. And I don't have the suggestion on top of my head what you would do. But I think you are introducing this bias, right?
I think it's a really good point, because anything, whenever you do something subjective, of course you're introducing subjectiveness, but even, of course, you have to also be careful about if you use a pre-trained model, what was that trained on, right? Is that also biased?
Yeah.
So it's really something that's important to keep in mind, and yeah, good point.
Yeah, so I think so two things. First, I think you touched on one of them. Did you actually consider, or have you tried using some transformer models as well and comparing performance to see how it was with those?
No. Okay. This was, I intentionally did not, because that's really a rabbit hole that you can go deep into, and you can tune hyperparameters and you can do all sorts of stuff. I wanted to get like an idea of the sort of results you can get quickly. Okay. So,
And the second thing, did you also do some kind of, since this is unsupervised, so did you do some ground truth checking, so actually going back to some of these reports to see the sentiment and also the context of what is said and match it up against, okay, what I'm seeing is right, or was it completely reliant on just the outcome?
I skimmed through some of the reports a bit. I didn't do it very thoroughly, but I went, of course, then had a bit of a look at the raw data, the reports. I didn't read through all of them in detail because it's
that's not the idea. Then we don't need the model.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Maybe you mentioned this, and I skipped it, but what's the reason for only taking financial institutions ESG reports?
Yeah. So it just so happens to be that the financial institutions, well, these are the large ones. They're large. They're publicly traded, and that means that they have been subject to directives like the EU CSRD for a while, meaning that they actually have the data available and have had to do these reports. So they're the ones that I was able to find reports for. Yeah.
I guess that also introduces a bias in the,
Yeah, definitely.
data.
Yeah.
So I think you also asked it before, I didn't hear the answer. I didn't quite understand what it is that you clustered. Was it individual sentences that you tried to create a topic for? Is it one topic for the entire report?
Oh,
That
yeah.
really, so what is it that you cluster?
Yeah.
And then second question is, is this a lab product where we're trying this to see if we can do it, or is it a report you did for an industry, or is it because we're building a product that we want to publish, or what's the use?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing, it's on sentence level.
Oh, so each
So,
sentence get a topic.
Yeah. Exactly.
good.
Yeah. And then by looking at how many sentences
There you go.
relate to each topic in each document, you can get this heat
There you
map.
go, yeah.
Right. And what was the other question? About the, so
Yes.
in this case, it's because we are really interested in doing this, and so we wanted to look into it, and we would love to do more of this because it's really interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course. Thank
And
you.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I was just curious, LDA, like the model you said you were using, is it just me, or is that like, is it not, what is it, like a dimensionality reduction algorithm?
that's linear discriminant analysis. They have the same abbreviation,
Ah, okay, fair
Yeah.
enough.
which is a bit annoying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for your attention.